All right, everybody. So welcome to tonight's last night for the summer series at Precision Performance and Physical Therapy. My name is Kate Edwards, Dr. Kate Edwards. I am the owner and founder of Precision Performance and Physical Therapy, and I'm kind of closing it out after my two incredible therapists, Dr. Elizabeth and Dr. Casey, took you through the rest of the summer. So what we're going to talk about today are the little things that are actually big things. And these are often the things that we like to ignore or maybe don't consider as important when it comes to running, injury prevention, or success in running. So the agenda will be what we kind of already know that we've talked about in the summer series. Some of our basic needs, we're going to touch on stress and mental fitness, sleep, fueling, and just kind of go through some final points. All of these things are things that we talk about with all of our athletes, whether they are weekend warriors, middle school, high school athletes, or even our professional or elite level athletes. I'm sorry that this picture is actually missing, but things that we've already talked about through the summer series. We've already addressed strength, talked about the importance of strength training and how that can prevent injury and help with performance. We've talked about running form, so breaking it down and what we need to think about. Small changes are really important. Don't do too many changes at once. And then training, so training cycles and just the idea of training altogether. So these are three topics, strength, form, and training, that are very important when it comes to running. However, those are a lot of times the things that we really focus on as runners: strength, form, and training. If we're lucky, we might also think about shoes, or some of our gear, what kind of data we're getting, that type of thing. But we're often missing some of the most important things when it comes to training. So how can we spend less time injured and more time enjoying running? And then if you are not, I'm going to admit somebody. So if you're not getting injured and you're enjoying your running, then the other question here would be, how can we meet more of our running goals, right? So when I think about running injury and running performance, I think about it on a continuum. And again, this is something, this slide is full of information, and honestly, probably too much information to take in on this short presentation, but this is something that I often talk about with a lot of my elite athletes, or athletes that are really trying to reach that ultimate level of performance and not get injured. The first thing I say is that you can't perform well if you're injured. So first we have to make sure that we set that kind of nice base of meeting their basic needs. So if we look at this health and performance continuum, you'll see that in the beginning, it's injury, illness, poor performance. It moves to healthy, performing well often, and feeling good. And then the last one is consistently at your peak performance or improving. Okay, so if you're somebody that's often injured, maybe you get a lot of upper respiratory infections, GI disturbances, and your performance is not really where you'd like it to be, then you're probably somebody that's not really meeting your basic needs. And that would be perhaps your nutrition is not dialed in, perhaps you're not sleeping enough, or your hydration isn't in order, maybe not getting enough rest mentally or physically. And then I always put poor breathing in here. Breathing, I think, is so important, not only because it helps get oxygen in, right, and helps their overall running economy, but also because breathing is important for core stability and running form. So if you're kind of down in that space where you're getting injured, these are things that you might want to tackle first. And we're going to go in depth with some of these things shortly. If you're somebody that's really got these things a little bit more dialed in, then you might be performing well most of the time. You might be healthy most of the time and feeling good most of the time, but you're not really meeting the goals that you really set for yourself, or you find that you get setbacks fairly often because you're injured. So then if you've really got those under control, but then you start adding some of these other things and you're surpassing your basic needs, then you're going to be somebody that's not really dealing with as much injury or illness. And this continuum goes on. We're really going to stick with this unmet needs and basic needs tonight, because these are considered what I would say the little things that make sure that we perform at our very best. Once we get those dialed in, that's when we start thinking about adding more of the other things which are listed here. Okay, so where can we start? Well, Like I said, let's focus on our basic needs as runners and humans. Stress management is huge. Making sure that you feel your body correctly is huge. Sleeping the amount of time that you need to sleep, which is generally about 7 to 9 hours a night, and learning how to listen to your body. And what I mean by listening to your body is, what are the cues that your body gives you that says you're about to get injured? We all have those things. You might start having aching in your knees when it's time to change shoes. You might notice that your energy level is plummeted during the middle of the day if you're not fueling appropriately. You might start to get a respiratory infection if you're overtraining. So there are a lot of different cues your body will give you, but if you can recognize those, then you can stop yourself before you get into that zone. So this is a topic. So stress is actually a topic I've given huge talks about that can go on for, an hour or more. So we're really going to bring it down here. But this idea that we have to understand what stress is. So the common saying that we say at Precision is that stress is stress. And what we mean by that is your body can't tell the difference between mental stress, emotional stress, physical stress, or spiritual stress. That means it doesn't know the difference between a 10-mile run and having a bad review at work. It doesn't know the difference between a speed workout or a hill workout and having difficulty with a relationship or financial trouble. So your body can't really tell the difference. And what that means is we have this finite amount that our body can handle in terms of stress. It's actually not finite. It's quite a lot of stress. But once we start overflowing the bucket or going past that tipping point, then our body can't come back as quickly. So that's when we get injured. That's when we get sick. So understanding that you have to manage your different kinds of stress around your training is really important. One of the things that I tell athletes all the time is that if you have a really big race that you want to run, make sure that that really big race is not at the same time you have a huge review at work or a big work project that's looming over you. Make sure you're not moving. Make sure it's not when you're graduating from school or have a big test if you're in school. So kind of try to plan the best that you can, those big events and those big races or those big training blocks in periods of your life that are less stressful than others. Of course, things come up that you can't control, and that's okay, but at least understanding that if you can plan it out, that helps a lot more. The other thing is that as athletes, we tend to like to address things that we are tangible, things that are easy or things that we understand. So we tend to address recovery from making sure that our trigger points are rolled out, making sure that we're stretching, making sure we're using the norm attack or whatever it is, before we're really thinking about the idea of, okay, are we taking mental rest? Are we taking enough downtime? Are we being creative enough? So that's just what we typically do. But what I'm hoping from this conversation or this lecture presentation today is that you'll see that if we kind of do some of the other things, then it can actually bleed over into our performance and make sure that we are not one of those people that continually gets injured so we can't perform better. So we really do have to train more than our physical bodies. We also have to train our emotions, our thoughts, what we're doing around that. We have to think about our creativity as well. So I like to say we need to slow down to go fast. This can be taken in a lot of different ways. A lot of coaches look at this and say, that's right. So that's why we do pacing. That's why we do slow runs in addition to really hard workouts, in addition to things on the track and hills and all of this. But I like to take it one step further. Yes, we need to slow down physically in order to get fast, but we also need to slow down from a nervous system standpoint. And so we have fight or flight or rest and digest when it comes to the nervous system. And a lot of time, most of us spend that time in that fight or flight. So constantly on, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like at the start of a race, we want to be in that kind of hyped up state so that we can perform at our best. We don't want to stay there all the time because it takes a toll on our system, on our cardiovascular system, on our adrenals, on our hormones, all of that. So we really need to learn how to switch from that fight or flight to that rest and digest so that our body can recover. And again, that puts us in that kind of place where we can stay injury-free and perform better. And so ways to do that include things like breath work, meditation, mental rest, having fun. It sounds silly, but having things outside of the sport that you love, whether it's playing guitar or cooking or coloring or photography, something outside of your sport actually is proven to help that switch between fight or flight and help you to kind of get into a better place where you're less burnt out and less likely to overtrain. So I know, again, these things aren't really sexy when we think about it, right? So say, go do breath work for 10 minutes. That's not something we want to do. We would rather put our shoes on and go out the door. We would rather maybe lift some weights. But these things actually have a huge impact on how the other things that we really love to do show up in our training. So when it comes to breath work and meditation, here are some of the things that can help you or what kind of comes up. So when we're talking about breath work, it can be many things. It could be box breathing. It could be just learning how to slow it down and take a minute. But there are a lot of different techniques that you can use for breath work that are pretty easy. On the app that I have coming out, RunSource, we have breath work and meditation because of its impact on the nervous system and on performance and injury. But breathwork actually stimulates the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve stimulates relaxation, which can change the levels, your cortisol levels in your body, which are what really show up when we're thinking about our stress response. It can decrease your heart rate, improve your blood pressure, decrease anxiety and nervousness, all things that many of us feel, especially if we're runners who tend to be type A. I know I am, so I can say that. Meditation is another really great way. So it depends on who you are. You may not want to do either, but most people gravitate towards breath work or meditation, but you're welcome to try both. Meditation actually has a lot more research to back it. It talks about how it reduces stress, reduces the inflammatory response in your body, which is really cool when you think about injury and how the inflammatory response kicks in. It helps decrease pain, may reduce anxiety, reduce IBS. It helps you be present in the moment, which can be really good if you have, if you're thinking about racing strategies and making sure that you're making good decisions during your races. It helps to improve your mood, your self-awareness, and overall sleep. Kristen Keem is a sports psychologist that actually does some breath work for one of the meditation apps out there. And one of the things that I love that she says, because you can kind of look at meditation and visualization a little bit differently than what I just framed, but she says that implementing a meditation and visualization program can provide athletes the way to train when being physical isn't an option. So if all of the benefits I just said weren't enough for you, this is really cool, because what we've seen that happens in the brain is that if you're sick, if you're injured, you've got too much to do in terms of work and you can't get that run in, but you still need to be training, you can take 10 minutes and work on a visualization or work on a meditation. And sometimes what that'll do is actually help, not sometimes, but what that'll do is help keep the pathways in your brain open as if you were training. So it's a really good tool to use when you're sick or you're injured. You can still stay at the top of your game if you're working through these visualization practices and meditation. So sleep is also a really important thing when we're talking about the little things. In fact, I don't actually think of sleep as a little thing at all. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do. Because sleep deprivation is so bad for us in so many ways. Here are only a few points that I've written, but there are so many other things. If we are deprived of sleep, what happens is increased cortisol, which I mentioned is a stress hormone, right? So that floods your body with all these stressors. And when we're stressed out, that starts to get that flight or fight response going. And then that makes everything kind of ramp up, which leads to overtraining. We have decreased glycogen synthesis, slower muscle recovery, changes in mood, and what's really interesting is there's an increased perceived exertion, which means that whatever you're doing, whether it's running, walking, strength training, cross training, it feels harder than it should. So if you have the appropriate amount of sleep, you actually will probably feel like it's not so bad if you're running a regular race pace, right? But if you are sleep deprived, that race pace will feel very hard to you. So sleep can really mess with you in quite a few ways. So it's important to have really good sleep hygiene. Now, there's a lot out there about sleep hygiene, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. But here are some things that you may know already and just don't do, but some things you may not. First thing is devices. This is one of the number one things across the board we see with our athletes, is that if you're on your device an hour before bedtime or you're scrolling before you go to bed, it's much, much harder to fall asleep. And also you may wake up during sleep because of the blue light and the interruption in your brain. So getting rid of devices, TV, video games, whatever it is, an hour before bed is really important. Try picking up reading a book, doing something creative instead. It's important to try and go to bed around the same time every night. Now, this isn't going to be perfect, but if you can have a general idea, your body starts to get used to going to bed at that time and in that kind of rhythm. 7 to 9 hours of sleep is the amount of sleep that most humans need. Now, this varies depending on your training cycle, how much running you're doing, how hard your workouts are, what level of athlete you are. I like a lot of my athletes to be more towards that kind of 10 to 12 hours of sleep. And that means that if they're working really, really hard, they need to get some sleep in with naps during the day, something around like 30 minutes, at least 4 hours before bedtime. If you set your room to, or your temperature in your room to somewhere between 65 and 68 degrees, that helps a ton because our body will naturally use that hot and cool to bring us to sleep and then also wake us up. In the morning, our body temperature rises to help wake us up. Warm shower at night is really great for increasing melatonin in your body. And with that increased melatonin, you're able to sleep better. You want a room that's dark and also quiet. That seems pretty obvious, but blackout curtains are amazing if you're an athlete. And just making sure that there are not a lot of distractions around is really, really important. So I think that sleep is the best performance enhancing drug out there, and it's free. So if you take one thing from this talk tonight, maybe it's work on your sleep. That's what I would say. Okay, so fueling. Fueling is another thing. Now, again, all of these things are really important, and it just depends. If you're someone that's not really addressing any of these, pick one to start with and go from there. It's usually, if you pick too many things at once, too many changes, you won't be successful. So it's important to find one thing, be successful for it or at that thing for 21 to 30 days, and then add something new. Fueling is a great thing to work on. So I often refer my clients to a sports dietitian. Most sports dietitians have to practice with, or they have to practice within the state that they have a license, but a lot of sports dietitians actually have multiple licenses and can do Zoom calls and things, which has made it a lot easier these days. So the number one thing about fueling is making sure you're getting enough fuel. So you have to have enough total calories in your diet to be able to take care of your basic functions. And if you're like a runner, you need to have enough calories to take care of your basic functions, plus your performance and your recovery. And so getting enough, there isn't a magic number. It varies depending on who you are, if you're male, if you're female, what your hormone levels are, how old you are, what kind of training you're doing, what does your life look like? So that's why I love a good sports dietitian when you're trying to really dial in your fueling. Something that a lot of people don't realize is that how you fuel and making sure you get enough actually impacts your mental health. So if you're not getting enough food, then you may actually be impacting your mental health in a very negative way. Getting enough food also decreases illness, respiratory infections, injuries, and you have to make sure that you're getting enough hydration and electrolytes as well, because that's also a safety issue. So then there's, in addition to getting enough, timing and quality is also really important. So making sure that you're fueling enough before your run, knowing what it is your body needs before the run and how much. If you're on a long run, if you're somebody that's doing marathons or half marathons, you're a distance runner, you might have to fuel during your run. Some people don't. If you're doing a 5K, that's not really necessary most of the time. And then fueling after, making sure that you're having something within that kind of 45-minute window after you're running. It's important to get enough micronutrients, proteins, carbs, and fats. And there is an impact on your hormones, depending on what you eat, how much you eat, and you can kind of use fuel to help with your hormonal patterns. So again, these are all things that a sports dietitian can help you with, but I feel like it's really important to have in this discussion if we're talking about all the things, the foundational things you need besides getting the right shoes, getting the right strength and mobility, and dialing in your running form. I like to look at it this way, just a couple of different ways, is that energy that you take in. So that's what food you take in on a daily basis, minus the energy cost. So how much exercise you're doing and how much your body needs for its basic function equals how much available energy you have. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is low energy availability. And low energy availability can lead to something that we call REDS, which is impacts your bone health, your menstruation, causes nutritional deficits, chronic fatigue, infections, illness. It really impacts every single part of your body, this low energy availability. And the thing that I would like to say, I'll go back here, if you look at this equation, is that a lot of times people don't realize that they're in low energy availability because they don't know how much fuel they should be doing based on the exercise that they're doing. So it's not usually because they're trying to be in low energy availability. So it's just another reason why a sports dietitian is really important. Okay, so I know that this is a lot to digest and it's rather quick, but that's because every single one of these topics could be an hour-long discussion. But this is what I want you to really take away, okay? It's that if you're not meeting your basic needs, you have to start there. So if you're not sleeping 7 to 9 hours, make sure that you're doing that. Make sure you're staying hydrated with enough electrolytes and water. Remember, if you drink way too much water and not enough electrolytes, that can be an issue too. There's something called hyponatremia. Begin your breath work or meditation. Make sure you have some kind of mental fitness or mental skills that you're working on, something to help you bring that nervous system in check, right? So that you're not always at that fight or flight place. Start noticing your mental patterns. Positive thoughts actually were linked with improved performance and lower perceived exertion in races. There's a couple of research articles about that. So making sure that looking at your thought patterns, how are you talking to yourself when you are in a race, when you're training, when you're walking around in your day? Figure out what your warning signs and signals are. Do you typically get a little bit sick when you're training too much or doing too much? Do you hurt your back if you're doing too much? Do you not sleep as well at night? Just kind of pay attention. That's something you can plug into your Strava. That's something you can plug into your Training Peaks, or you can write in some kind of journal if that's what you still do. And then, of course, I always, as a PT, I feel like it's my place to make sure that I say, make sure you're staying strong and mobile. Like those are that goes without being said. There's so much research on how strength training and mobility are really, really important that you have to do that. And that's why we had those other lectures as part of the summer series. So thank you. Right here, we have a couple QR codes. The first one was actually for Precision Performance. Our Instagram, if you want to follow it. The second one is our Instagram for RunSource, which is the running app that's coming out shortly, probably in the next 2 weeks. And that's going to have, we have like 45 experts from across the country, Great Britain and Canada, that are running medicine, MDs, PTs, dietitians, yoga instructors, strength trainers. It's really cool. And then there are More Than Miles podcasts that Dr. Casey, who did some of the other lectures in the summer series, are part of. So I know that there aren't a lot of people on this call, but if anyone has a question, you can definitely ask. If not, you will get this. Obviously, you'll be getting this link in your email. There's quite a few people that signed up for that, and you can always send in your questions. My email is kate@precisionpt.org. Casey's is casey@precisionpt.org, and Elizabeth is elizabeth@precisionpt.org. I hope that you guys have had a great summer and that these talks have been helpful and that you've taken at least one thing away from them. Thank you. All right. And